The winter of 1873 was the harshest anyone in Copper Creek had ever seen. Snow piled higher than fence posts, and the wind cut through the valley like a blade forged in the depths of winter. Martha Henderson stood at her cabin window, watching the storm rage beyond the frosted glass, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air inside her modest home. At 42 years old, Martha had weathered many storms, both literal and otherwise. Her husband Samuel had passed 3 summers prior, leaving her alone on their small homestead with nothing but a few chickens, a stubborn mule named Moses, and the clothes on her back. The bank in town had been patient, but patience, like her dwindling food supplies, thin. She stirred the pot hanging over her fireplace one more time. The stew was mostly water now, with a few precious carrots, some wild onions she'd managed to forage before the snow hit, and the last of her salted pork. It would have to last her another 3 days until she could make the treacherous journey into town for supply. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and Martha pulled her shawl tighter around her. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to a weak knocking at her door, so faint she almost missed it, the tempest's roar. Martha hesitated. In these parts, strangers meant trouble more often than not, but the knocking came again, weaker this time, and something in her heart wouldn't let her ignore it. She lifted the wooden bar from the door and pulled it open. 2 small figures tumbled into her cabin, bringing a whirlwind of snow and bitter cold. Boys, she realized, though they were so covered in grime and ice that she could barely make out their features. The taller one couldn't have been more than 12, the smaller perhaps 8 or 9. Their clothes were little more than rags, and their bare feet blue with cold. "Please, ma'am," his teeth chattering so violently he could barely speak. "We ain't eaten in 3 days. Our pipe—" He didn't make it through the mountain. Martha didn't need to hear more. She quickly shut the door against the storm and guided the boys. Their skin was like ice beneath her touch, and she could see they were near the point of no return, the cold and hunger. "Sit by the fire," she commanded gently, already reaching for every blanket she owned. "What are your names?" "I'm Billy," said the older boy, wrapping his arms around his younger companion. "This here's my brother Tommy. We've been walking for 2 days trying to find help." Martha looked at her pot of stew, then at the 2 boys who were likely facing their final hours if she didn't act. There was enough for 1 person for 3 days, or enough for 3 people for 1 meal. The choice was clear. "Well, Billy and Tommy, you're safe now. Let's get some warm food in you." She ladled out generous portions for each boy, giving them the lion's share of what she had. They ate with the desperation of those who had stared death in the face, and Martha felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "This is the best stew I ever tasted, ma'am," Tommy said, his voice still weak but stronger than before. "What's your name?" Billy asked. "Martha Henderson," she replied, settling with a much smaller bowl for herself. "This is my home, and you're welcome to stay until the storm passes and you're strong enough to travel." The boys stayed for 5 days. During that time, Martha shared not just her food, but her warmth, stories, and her kindness. She learned that they were traveling with their father to start a new life in California when he had taken ill, away in the mountain, truly alone in the world. Billy was sharp as a whip, with eyes that seemed older than his years. Tommy was gentler, always quick with a smile despite their circumstances. Martha found herself growing attached to them, wondering if perhaps God had sent them to fill the emptiness in her heart. On the morning of the 6th day, Martha woke to find the boy on her table. They had left a small carved wooden horse that Billy had whittled their stay, along with a note written in careful childish handwriting. "Thank you for saving our... We won't forget." Billy and Tommy. Martha searched the snowy landscape around her cabin, but there was no trace of where they had gone. It was as if they had vanished into the morning mist. The months that followed were the hardest of Martha's. Without any food reserves, she struggled to survive the remainder of winter. She sold her chickens one by one, then her few pieces of jewelry, and finally Moses the mule. The bank eventually foreclosed on her property, and she was forced to move into a tiny room above the general store in town, working for mere pennies to sweep floors and tend the store when the owner was away. Years passed, and Martha never forgot the 2 boys she had helped. She often wondered what had become of them, whether they had found family or had to make their own way in the harsh world. The wooden horse sat on her small table, her most treasured possession, and a reminder that kindness, even when it costs everything, is never wasted. By 1879, Martha was 51 years old and worn down by hard living. Her hair had gone gray, and her hands were rough from constant work. She had never married again, never had children of her own, and had accepted that she would likely live out her days alone in that small room. The town of Copper Creek had grown somewhat over the years. The railroad had come through, bringing more settlers and commerce. Martha had watched the changes with a mixture of hope and resignation. Progress meant opportunities for some, but for folks like her, it often just meant higher prices and more competition for work. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring when Martha first noticed the dust cloud on the horizon. She was sweeping the porch of the general store when old Pete McKenzie came running down the main street, his face pale with excitement and worry. "Martha, you better come see this," he called. "There's a whole army of riders coming this way." Martha squinted against the mornings, her hand shading her eyes. Indeed, there was a substantial dust cloud, growing larger by the minute. In these parts, a large group of riders could mean many things, none of them particularly good. It could be outlaws, cattle rustlers, or even worse. The townspeople began gathering in the street, murmuring among themselves with nervous energy. Sheriff Collins emerged from his office, his hand resting on his revolver, though everyone knew that his six-shooter would be little match for force was. As the minutes passed, the dust cloud grew closer, and the thunder of hoofbeats began to echo through the valley. Martha could make out individual riders now. There had to be at least 100 of them, maybe more. They rode in formation like military men, and they were moving with purpose directly toward Copper Creek. "Everyone stay calm," Sheriff Collins, though his voice betrayed his own nervousness. "Let's see what they want before we start assuming the worst." Martha felt her heart. She had lived through raids before, had heard the stories of entire towns being wiped out by roving bands of desperate men. But something about this group struck her as different. They weren't riding like men fleeing justice or seeking easy prey. They rode like men with a mission. The riders came to a halt at the edge of town, their horses snorting and stamping after the long journey. Martha could see them clearly now. They were a mixed group of men, some young, some old, but all well armed and well mounted. Their clothes suggested they were prosperous, and their discipline indicated they were organized. Two riders separated from the group and began walking their horses slowly down the main street. The townspeople instinctively backed away, creating a clear path. Martha found herself pressed against the porch railing, unable to look away from the approaching figures. As they drew closer, something about the led rider struck her as familiar. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his hat. His companion was slightly smaller, but rode with the same confident bearing. Both men appeared to be in their early 20s, and there was something in the way they carried themselves that tugged at Martha's memory. The lead rider stopped his horse directly in front of the general store, his eyes scanning the small crowd until they came to rest on Martha. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the young man removed his hat, revealing a face that had matured but still held echoes of the boy she. "Ma'am," deep, respectful. "Would you happen to be Martha Henderson?" Martha's hand her throat, her eyes wide with recognition and disbelief. "Billy?" she whispered. The young man's face broke into a smile that transformed his stern features completely. "Yes, ma'am, Billy Morrison. And this here," he gestured to his companion, "is my brother Tommy." Tommy pulled off his hat as well, and Martha saw the gentle boy she remembered, now grown into a handsome young man with kind eyes and an easy smile. "But how did you find me?" Martha stammered, still struggling to believe what she was seeing. Billy dismounted and approached the porch steps, his movements careful and respectful. "Mrs. Henderson, we've been looking for you for 3 years. When we went back to your cabin, it was empty. We tracked you through county records, talked to who knew you. We never stopped searching." The crowd around had grown large, everyone straining to hear the expected reunion. Sheriff Collins lowered his hand, sensing that whatever this was, it wasn't. "But why?" Martha asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Why would you spend so much time looking for me?" Tommy had dismounted as well and joined his brother at the base of the porch steps. "Because you saved our lives, Mrs. Henderson, not just from the cold and hunger that night, but from giving up hope entirely. We promised each other that if we ever made something of ourselves, we'd come back and repay your kindness." Billy reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch, heavy with the sound of coins. "Mrs. Henderson, we've done well for ourselves these past few years, real well. We own 3 silver mines in Colorado, a cattle ranch in Montana, and we've got business interests in San Francisco. But none of that would have happened if you hadn't given us a chance that winter night. Martha shook her head. Oh, boys, you don't owe me anything. I did what any decent person would do. No, ma'am. You did what a person with a truly good heart would. You gave us everything you had when you had nothing. Most people would have turned us away, told us to try somewhere else. You could have given us just enough to get by, kept most of your food for yourself. But you didn't. You shared everything. Tommy stepped forward with his own pack. We've brought more than money, Mrs. We've brought you a deed to a property we purchased. It's a beautiful house on 50 acres just outside Denver with a view of the mountain. It's yours, along with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Martha felt her knees go. Boys, I can't accept it's too much. Billy's expression grew serious. Mrs. Henderson, that night in your cabin, you taught us something we never forgot. You showed us that even when you have nothing left, you can still choose to be generous. That lesson guided every decision we made, every business deal, every relationship we built. Our success isn't just ours, it's partly yours too. He paused, looking back at the 100 riders waiting patiently at the edge of these men behind us. They're our employees, our business partners, our friends. Every one of them has heard the story of the woman who shared her last meal with 2 hungry boys. They insisted on coming with us because they wanted to witness this moment. Martha looked past the brothers to the assembled riders, and she could see in their faces not menace or indifference, but respect and curiosity. These were good men who had ridden hundreds of miles to see an act of gratitude fulfilled. There's one more thing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, worn smooth by years of handling. It was the wooden horse Billy had carved for her all those years ago. You kept it. Billy carved another one that we each carried one to remind us of what we owed you and what we wanted to become. This is yours. We thought you might like to have it back along with everything else. The emotions Martha had been holding back finally overwhelmed her. She sank into the rocking chair on the porch, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of joy and amazement at how the world could sometimes serve its goodness. Billy and Tommy climbed the porch steps and knelt beside her chair, just as they had knelt by her fireplace all those years ago. We never forgot your kindness, and we never forgot the promise we made to ourselves. We said that if we ever became successful, we'd make sure you never wanted for anything again. How did you become so successful? Tommy, partly luck, partly hard work, but mostly because of the lesson you taught us about taking care of others. We started our first business, a small trading post. We always made sure to help folks who were down on their luck. We gave jobs to men who couldn't find work elsewhere, helped families who were struggling. Word got around that we were fair and generous, and people wanted to do business with us. Billy nodded. Every time we faced between making more money or doing the right, we thought about how you chose to help us, even when it cost you. It wasn't always the easy. Sheriff Collins approached them. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly happened between you and the young men? Martha looked. 6 years ago, during the worst winter storm anyone could remember, these boys showed up at my door half-frozen and starving. I gave them the only food I had left, my last pot of stew that was supposed to last me several days. The sheriff's, You gave hungry strangers your last food? They were children, Martha said simply. They needed it more than I did. Billy stood and addressed the growing. That's not the whole story. Mrs. Henderson here was already struggling to keep her homestead. After she fed us and cared for us for 5 days, she had nothing left. She lost her home, had to sell everything she owned just to survive. Our survival came at the cost of her security, and she made that sacrifice willingly for 2 boys she'd never met before. A murmur of amazement rippled through the crowd. This was the kind of story that would be told and retold for generations, a tale of selfless kindness and eventual justice. Tommy addressed the townspeople as well. We brought all these men with us today because we wanted witnesses to this moment. We wanted people to see that kindness doesn't go unrewarded, even if sometimes it takes years for that reward to come. One of the riders from the back of the group called out, "Tell them about the other folks?" Billy smiled and nodded. Over the years, as our businesses grew, we started seeking out others who had shown us kindness during our... We've been able to help quite a few. Mrs. Henderson the first, and her story is the one that started it. Martha stood up slowly, still overwhelmed by everything that was happening. Boys, I need you to know something. Those 5 days I spent with were some of the brightest in a very dark time of my life. Losing Samuel had left me so lonely, and taking care of you two reminded me what it felt like to have family again. You gave me just as much as I gave you." Tommy's eyes misted over. Would you consider coming with us to Colorado? We'd love for you to be part of our family officially. We both married good women who would be honored to know you, and Billy has 2 little ones who could use a grandmother." Billy nodded eagerly. "We've never forgotten that you treated us like sons when we were strangers. We'd like to treat you like the mother you were to us when we needed one most." Martha looked around at the town that had been her home for 6 years, then at the 2 men who had once been desperate boys in her care. "Are you sure? I'm just a simple woman. I don't know anything about high society or fine living." "Mrs. Henderson," Billy said with a grin, "we don't want you to be anyone but exactly who you are. The woman who taught us that the size of your heart matters more than the size of your bank account." The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, stepped forward from the crowd. "Martha, you should go. You've worked harder than anyone deserves to work, and you've never complained, not once. If these young men want to take care of you the way you took care of them, then you should let." Other townspeople began voicing their agreement, and Martha realized that her decision was already made. She had spent 6 years wondering what had become of Billy and Tommy, and now she had her answer. More than that, she had been given a second chance at the family she had always wanted. "I'll need to pack my things," she said finally. "Take your time. We'll be staying in town for a few days anyway. Some of our men need rest, and we want to make sure everything is arranged properly." Billy pulled out a roll of bills from his pocket. "Mr. Peterson, my brother and I would like to buy for the whole. Consider it our way of saying thank you for taking care of Mrs. Henderson all the general store owner's jaw dropped. "Sir, that's very generous, but it's not necessary." "Not," he agreed, "but it's what Mrs. Henderson would do if she had the means. She taught us that when you're blessed, you share those blessings with others." As the crowd began to disperse and the riders made camp outside of town, Martha found herself sitting on the porch with Billy and Tommy, marveling at how much they had changed, and yet how much they remained the same. "Tell me about your lives. Tell me everything that happened." Cabin. Billy leaned back in his chair, his expression growing thoughtful. "Well, after we left your place, we made our way to Denver. We were still just kids, but we'd learned to be resourceful. Tommy here turned out to have a real gift with animals, and I had a head for numbers." Tommy picked up the story. "We started by doing odd jobs around the mining camps. Billy would keep track of supplies and inventory for the miners, and I'd tend their horses and mules. We saved every penny we earned. Within 2 years, we had enough to buy a claim that everyone else thought was played out," Billy continued. "But I'd been studying the geological patterns, and I had a hunch there was still silver in that mountain. Turned out I was right. The first mine was just the beginning. We used the profits from that to buy more claims, then to start the cattle ranch, then to invest in other businesses. But we never forgot where we came from or who helped us get there." Martha shook her head in wonder. "I always knew you boys were special, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Billy reached over and took her hand. "Mrs. Henderson, what you did for us that night didn't just save our lives. It shaped who we became. Every time we faced a difficult decision, we asked ourselves what you would do. That guidance was worth more than any education we could have received." As the sun began to set over Copper Creek, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Martha felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. The wooden horse sat in her lap, smooth and familiar beneath her fingers, and she was surrounded by the 2 boys who had grown into fine men. "There's something I want you both to know," she said quietly. "That winter when you stayed with me was the coldest I'd ever experienced, but it was also the warmest. Having you boys in my home, taking care of you, watching you get stronger each day, it reminded me why life is worth living." Tommy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "We felt the same way. After losing Pa, we thought we were alone in the world. But you showed us that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who care for each other when times are." Billy nodded. "When we decided to come find you, it wasn't just about repaying a debt. We wanted to see you again because you're part of our family. You always have been." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Word of Martha's story spread throughout the region, and people traveled from neighboring towns just to meet the woman who had shared her last meal with 2 strangers, and lived to see her kindness returned 100-fold. The riders Billy and Tommy had brought with them proved to be a fascinating group. There was Samuel Rodriguez, a former outlaw who had gone straight after Billy and Tommy gave him a job at their ranch. Dr. Michael O'Brien, an Irish physician who had treated Tommy for a fever when they couldn't afford medical care, and who now served as the company doctor for all their operation. Each man had his own story of how the Morrison brothers had touched his life, and each was eager to be part of this moment of gratitude and justice. On the morning of their departure, the entire town of Copper Creek gathered to see Martha off. She had packed her few belongings into a single trunk: the wooden horse, her few articles of clothing, Samuel's old Bible, and a photograph of her late husband. "Are you ready for this adventure, Mrs. Henderson?" Billy asked, as he helped her into the comfortable wagon they had prepared for her journey. Martha looked back at the town that had been her home, then forward toward the mountains of Colorado, where her new life awaited. "I think I am, boy. I think I really am." Ached. As their procession began to move, with Martha riding in comfort, while the 100 horsemen formed an honor guard around her, she reflected on the strange turns life could take. 6 years ago, she had been a widow, facing the loss of everything she owned. Today, she was traveling to a new home with 2 young men who considered her their mother, and enough wealth to live comfortably the rest of her. But more than the money or the property, what filled Martha was the knowledge that her simple act of kindness had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. Billy and Tommy hadn't just become successful, they had become good men who used their success to help others, just as she had helped them. As they rode through the afternoon sunshine, Tommy rode up beside her wagon. "Mrs. Henderson, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "That night, when we showed up at your door, were you scared? We must have looked pretty rough." Martha considered the question seriously. "You know, Tommy, I was frightened when I first heard the knocking, but the moment I saw you boys, all I could think about was getting you warm and fed. I suppose when someone needs help that desperately, fear becomes less important than doing what's right." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "That's what we tell our children now. Billy's little ones and the ones at the orphanage we support in Denver. We tell them that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing, even when you are afraid." "You support an orphanage?" Martha. Billy had overheard the conversation. "We do. About 50 children at any given time. We make sure they all get good educations, help them find work or trades when they're old enough. Some of them even work for our companies now." Martha felt her eyes well up. "You boys have built something with your life." "We had a good teacher." Smile. As they made camp that evening, Martha found herself surrounded by men eager to hear stories about Billy and Tommy as children. She told them about Tommy's gentle way with her chickens and how Billy had insisted on chopping firewood, even though he was still weak. She shared how they had both helped her with chores around the cabin and how they had made her laugh during some of the darkest days of her life. "You know," said Samuel Rodriguez, the former outlaw, "hearing these stories makes a lot of things make sense about the Morrison brothers. They never ask anyone to do anything they wouldn't do themselves, and they never forget where they came from." Dr. O'Brien nodded in agreement. "They treat everyone with respect, from the wealthiest investor to the newest ranch hand. Now I understand why. They learned from someone who saw the worth in 2 hungry, dirty boys when others might have seen only trouble." As the fire died down and the men settled in for the night, Martha lay in her comfortable bedroll, looking up at them. She thought about the mysterious that life would circle back on its, how a moment of compassion could echo through the years, return transformed into something greater than what was originally given. The journey to Colorado took 8 days, and each day brought new story and new understanding of the men Billy and Tommy had become. They had built their empire through ruthless or fair dealing and genuine concern for their employees. Were loyal, not because they had to be, but because they wanted to. When they finally reached the house that was to be Martha's new home, she gasped in amazement. It was a beautiful 2-story structure, a wrap-around porch, and a view of snow-capped peaks. Her breath away. The property included gardens, pastures, and even a small pond stocked with fish. "Boys, this is too much. This must have cost a fortune." Tommy grinned. "Mrs. Henderson, we're worth more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. This house cost us about as much as that pot of stew cost you, which is to say, it represents something we're happy to give because we care." Billy led her up onto the porch and handed her, "Welcome home, Mrs. Henderson. Welcome to the family." As Martha opened the door to her new home, she found it furnished with beautiful but comfortable pieces and fresh flowers in vases throughout the rooms. On the mantelpiece of the fireplace sat a familiar object, a wooden horse, identical to the one she carried, but larger and more intricately carved. "Billy made that one last year," Tommy explained. He said every home should have a reminder of where blessings come from. Martha picked up the carving, admiring its beautiful. You've become quite the artist, Billy. I had time to practice, Billy said. I carved one of these every year on the anniversary of the night. Tommy and I always spend that evening talking about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't. As they showed her through the house, Martha met Billy's wife, Sarah, and their 2 children, 5-year-old Emma and 3-year-old Samuel. She also met Tommy's wife, Rebecca, who was expecting their first child. We've told the children so much about their grandmother Martha. They've been excited to meet you for weeks. Little Emma ran up to Martha and hugged her. Daddy says you saved him and Uncle Tommy when they were little boys. Are you going to live with us now? Martha knelt down to Emma's level, her heart full to overflow. Yes, sweetheart, I'm going to live here, be part of your family, if that's all. It's very all right. We need a grandmother. Mama said grandmothers give the best hugs and tell the best story. That evening, as they all sat around the dinner table sharing a meal that was abundant and joyful, Martha reflected on how far the 2 scared, hungry boys had become successful businessmen and loving family men. The lonely widow had shared her bowl of stew, was now surrounded by children's laughter and the warmth. I want to propose a toast, Billy said, raising his glass, to Mrs. Martha Henderson, who taught us that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely from one heart to another. To Martha, the whole table chorused, and Martha felt tears of joy slide down her cheeks. As the months passed, Martha settled into her new life with wonder and gratitude. She helped care for the children, tended the gardens, and became the heart of the house. Billy and Tommy continued to seek her advice on both business and personal matters, valuing her wisdom and perspective. The wooden horse from her original cabin sat on her bedside table, and each night before sleep she would hold it and remember that cold winter evening when 2 desperate boys had changed her life forever. She had given them her last bowl of stew. In return, they had given her a family, a home, and the knowledge that kindness, no matter how small, can change the world. Years later, when visitors would ask Martha about the secret to the Morrison brothers' success, she would smile and tell them it was simple. They learned that when you take care of others, others will take care of you. And when you have more than you need, you share it with those who have less. It's not complicated. It just takes a willing heart. The story of Martha Henderson and the 2 boys became legend throughout Colorado and beyond. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, in schoolhouses and churches, as an example of how a single act of kindness can ripple outward through time to touch countless lives. And in the Morrison household, every winter when the snow began to fall, the family would gather around the fireplace to hear Martha tell the story the story of how she shared her last stew with 2 dirty boys, and how they returned years later, 100 riders behind them. She never went hungry again. The wooden horse would be passed from hand to hand as a tangible reminder that generosity given freely always finds its way back to the giver, multiplied beyond all expectation. And in the hearts of all who heard the tale, the lesson was planted, that in a world that can often seem harsh and unforgiving, kindness remains the most powerful force of all.